Well, hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. As you know, my channel focuses on food forest gardening. Um, but food forest gardening also happens to be, besides just growing food, true food forest gardening happens to be one way to rewild an area. And this video is focused on the subject of rewilding. I'm rewilding my backyard here as I transform it into a food forest. I'm also rewilding my front yard, but it's a very different type of habitat. And that's what I want to cover in this video. Two very different habitats in Florida that exist, very similar habitats that exist in Florida. And why we're rewilding differently for these two areas, because the sites are so different. And then my approach in terms of maintenance and management and the work that I want to do, that I'm willing to do, is very different. I'd rather spend more time in my backyard where I have more privacy back here, and less time in the front yard where it's just wide open on the corner of two streets, and no privacy at all out there in the front yard. So back here in the backyard, we already have these big oak trees in place. So it made perfect sense to rewild this to a forest. I could have just stopped mowing and done nothing at all, and nature would have done that for me. By deciding to grow a food forest back here and planting lots of both native and non-native plants, I've created a novel ecosystem that's going to be heavily dependent and involved with native species of plants and animals, both. But it is a novel ecosystem because I've got non-native plants really from all over the world back here, also mixed in with all these native species. But like I said, since I'm starting out with my canopy already in place with these large oaks, rewilding this to a forest makes a lot of sense. The other thing that would happen if I just stopped mowing and didn't do anything at all is it would slowly try to actually revert to a native Florida forest. And that's a particular forest because there's that really hot, dry season in April and May. And I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and provide some water that would not normally be provided naturally in a wild Florida native habitat. And so that's another way that my food forest garden is a bit novel as compared to an actual existing Florida native habitat. I'm going to provide some water so that I can bridge that gap between the cooler months when water's not needed that much, and when the monsoon rains come starting in June. There's a little gap in there in April and May that's really hot and dry. And that would dictate what type of forest this could become. And many of my fruit trees just would not be able to survive. They certainly, at least they wouldn't be able to fruit well. And actually many of them would not even be able to survive. You know, these plum trees and just a lot of my fruiting plants, especially to be able to produce fruit, they're gonna need some water. So anyway, enough about the food forest. I've put out, I guess, over 50 videos about my food forest. Now I want to turn my attention to the rewilding effort that I'm doing in my front yard. It's very different. I've mentioned it in a couple of videos. These are my videos on xeriscaping. And that's because xeriscape landscape is one that you don't water. And that's what I plan on doing out here in the front yard. I don't want to water this at all. So so what are your options then? What type of Florida habitat do you have to work with when you don't have any trees? As we can see here, there's no trees except for these little ones that I've planted. But I started out with no trees here. It's very dry, very hot. I've got all this very hot asphalt and concrete and all these streets surrounding this area. Very hot, very dry. So Florida habitats that are like that savanna type habitats is what they are. They're sparsely populated with trees. They're mostly open space without a lot of trees. And so you're talking about the sandhill habitat, pine flatwoods, oak scrub type habitats. Well, we can't really create one of those kind of habitats exactly right here in this spot. What we can do is mimic it in many ways, but we really can't totally recreate it because those habitats are heavily dependent on fire. Okay, they require periodic fire, and I don't want to have a fire in my front yard. So what can I do then? I really don't want to mow. I really want to return this space to nature. I don't want to waste energy and my time mowing the grass. I think that's counterproductive. And I don't want it to continue to be this lifeless, space, just because that's what people do. They just mow their grass and they just leave it as a lifeless form. That does no good for nature. And if it costs you money and resources to maintain something that is lifeless, that makes no sense to me. So I want the birds and the bees and lizards and other creatures to return to this habitat. So I've decided to do a xeriscape garden here that somewhat mimics a Florida savanna type habitat. So I've put in a few species, native species, a bunch of them. Some of them are non-native, but longleaf pine, and just this morning I put in some wiregrass. These little wiregrass clumps haven't even had time to straighten themselves out a little bit. And some small oak trees. I'm not sure the species of oak here, but I think it's a scrub oak type oak. I'm hoping it's something like a Chapman oak. That would be a really excellent oak for dry scrub habitat. And I've planted, some Florida sable palms in here, and some muley grass. That's another Florida species. And some dune sunflower. And I'm going to be putting in some more dune sunflower, and I've planted some frog fruit, and there was already some existing frog fruit. I'm going to be planting dune sunflower and frog fruit through here, and there is already a lot of existing frog fruit in here. If you look, there's a lot of frog fruit in here. So I'm going to augment it with more frog fruit and go ahead and continue to plant this dune sunflower all out through this area, all out into here. And this happens to be the drain field for my septic. But the dune sunflower and the frog fruit, by all accounts, including the researchers at the University of Florida, that's a safe planting to put on top of a septic drain field. And I have plans to continue with more Florida species. So I want to take advantage of this drainage. It actually doesn't work as drainage here. It never even fills up with water, no matter how hard it rains. But this ditch out here, it does at least get somewhat moist when it rains. But often, most of the time, it's quite dry. Well, there's a perfect Florida plant for that, and it's called fakahatchee grass. Fakahatchee grass is an amazing species. It's a big clumping grass that can get 6 feet tall, but it can take being flooded, as long as it's not for too long, and then it can take being bone dry for weeks and weeks at a time. So fakahatchee grass, that's my plan for that space down in the ditch there. So what'll happen if I don't water it all is this will slowly evolve. There'll be a natural succession that will occur, and it's already started. We've got some things popping up now that we're not mowing, like this. And this is Biden's alba. Just a wild native Florida plant. There's a bee. There's a bee, and here we are in mid-December, and we have a bee on the flower. And look, there's a moth. There's a little moth right there. Little guy. So obviously these are important pollinator support species. But we have other weeds popping up in here. There's a camphor weed. There's interesting little plants popping up in here now that we're not mowing. So this is already beginning to transform into an area that's got more life. So we're rewilding this yard simply by not mowing anything. Now there's different zones. We do have a little bit more moisture to work with there above the septic field, but the rest of the yard is just bone dry. Super, super dry. There's a little water over the septic field. It's not so much water though that Dune sunflower, which really doesn't like much water, that it couldn't live over it. Dune sunflower has such shallow roots. They shouldn't go down deep enough to get to an area where it's so wet that they won't like it. Frog fruit also is a shallow rooted plant. So they should actually be able to exist right above where the more concentrated water is down below over in the septic field. Here's another part of the yard here that's got a little bit more water than the rest of it, and that's because of just the runoff off the roof here. All this right here. And it's also in the shade. This starting to become early afternoon right now. And as the afternoon progresses, this shadow will come on out more and more. So this is a late afternoon shady, a little bit wetter than typical spot. And sure enough, this is where the most lush Biden's alba has started to grow. There's Biden's alba all through here. Really good for the pollinators. And then we've also got other herbs. I'm not even sure what herb this is. It's something in the mint family, it appears. And then there's other plants. Now this area is the third area out front here that gets a little bit more water, and that's just because I'm trying to create a privacy screen right across this fence line here, just using this sweet viburnum. And so I'm watering this. The sweet viburnum needs some water to at least become established. And then plus, when it gets really hot and dry, even after it is established, if you go ahead and water the sweet viburnum, it'll grow more quickly and more lush. So these areas get a little bit more water, plus you can see it's in the shade in the afternoon. So there's something interesting. I don't even know what this plant is, but it's something interesting that's growing in here. When the monsoon rains return in June, there'll be a 4-month period there where it'll be really wet out here. And all of a sudden it gets transformed into this wet environment with all sorts of plants growing really fast, and it can get overgrown in a hurry. And in a natural Florida ecosystem habitat, you know, that becomes a lot of the fuel for the wildfires that burn and go through. So I think what I'm probably going to have to do is do a little bit of weed eating, possibly mowing with my mower. I've got to keep that fuel from getting out of hand, and I'm expecting it to grow like crazy during the rainy season. For the rest of the year, I don't water, I don't mow. It's been 2 months at least since I've mowed this grass. You can see it's so dry that it just hasn't grown. Might have been 3 months since the last time I mowed this grass. And that proves the point about how dry it is in the bottom of this ditch. Look down in the bottom of this ditch, and it's not even very lush. There's a lot of frog fruit growing right there. Actually, no, it's not. It's something that got burnt by the frost. But yeah, there's a lot of frog fruit in here though. Anyway, even down here in the bottom of this ditch, it's not lush. I have not mowed it in 2 or 3 months. it's dry. It's really dry out here. In the summertime, it gets really hot. There's an awful lot of heat that comes off of this asphalt, concrete, and then the houses around here are stucco, like mine. So just everything's radiating a bunch of heat. It reminds me a lot of Phoenix, Arizona, where I lived for 7 years. So, and I think that's where I got my first exposure to the idea of xeriscaping, because there's a lot of xeriscape yards in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, they get typically about 7 inches of rain a year. We're closer to 50, but since more than half of that comes in only 4 months, the rest of the year it's pretty xeric environment, especially because the sand doesn't hold moisture well. So the ground dries out really quick in the other 8 months. So it's just good that some of that time is during the winter time. It's cooler and you don't need as much water for plants. So, you know, every place has its own unique conditions, its own type of soil, its own type of weather conditions, climate. So you really have to tailor gardens and plants and how you want to plant things and manage things. You have to tailor it to the location. It's sort of like that old saying, there's 3 things in real estate, right? Location, location, location. I think that's the same is also true of food forest gardening and of rewilding. All right, just a couple of thoughts there on that. Take care, folks. Happy gardening.